Will your Tau be striking with a hammer blow, or will the patient hunter get the prey? Let's talk about two new, enormously powerful special rules in Mont'ka and Kauyon. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where today we're talking about Games Workshop's latest Tau preview, and probably the most meaningful thing that they've actually told us about the new codex that's going to be coming out in January. So far they've shown us a few little weapon profiles, including an upgunned pulse rifle, and a couple of the changes to Darkstrider. Today though we finally get some really good stuff, showing off the new Mont'ka and Kauyon special rules, which have now become Tau's entire army abilities, and what's more, they're both insanely powerful. In the main Tau fighting doctrine, generally commanders tend to aspire to either Mont'ka or Kauyon philosophies. In general, Mont'ka boiling down to just hitting the enemy very hard and aggressively as soon as possible, knock them reeling and then keep on hitting them until you win, delivering victory from the boldness of their commanders' daring strikes. Kauyon, on the other hand, is the more measured approach, the doctrine of the patient hunter waiting in ambush. Kauyon commanders being very happy to stall the enemy, delay them, perhaps even fall back and give up a lot of ground to the advancing forces, who, lulled into a false sense of security, expose themselves to a devastating counterstrike. These have been in the Tau combat doctrine ever since their faction first came about, and in 8th edition they were manifested in-game as a couple of auras for your warlord. Mont'ka was one where you gain a 6-inch aura of move and shoot for no penalty, good for a whole load of battlesuits or things advancing into the midboard perhaps, though it was potentially even more useful in 9th edition, where because of the way that the rule was worded, it interacted with the movement phase in a way that meant that you could fall back and still shoot. Maybe it was a bit weird for the aggressive stance to reward falling back, but I think it still fit in quite well play-wise because it meant that you could afford to put your units closer to the enemy and not worry quite as much if they managed to get tagged in combat. In general though, because of this, Mont'ka was the one that was more played in 9th edition. Kauyon, on the other hand, that gives you an aura of reroll hit rolls for your units nearby, provided they didn't move. A really powerful shooting buff and just what the Tau enjoy. It maybe worked a little bit better in 8th edition though, when there wasn't quite as much line of sight blocking terrain on the board, and the game more heavily rewarded just shooting your opponent to death and then moving up to claim the objectives. Farsight and Shadowsun both had special versions of their rule. They can both allow you to use the abilities twice, making them really quite decent choices for heading up the army, particularly as they aren't all that expensive points-wise. Now, however, it seems that system has been entirely replaced by this new ability. You get to choose one of them before the start of the battle, so it seems that you could do that after you've seen your opponent's list and decide if you want to either play cagey or go for the throat straight away. In any case, Mont'ka gives you a big boost on turns 1 to 3, and Kauyon gives you a boost on turns 3 to 5, so it depends whether you want to stack all your damage and extra abilities towards the end of the game or towards the start. So taking a look at the actual rule itself then, first up here we have Mont'ka. This gives you two different benefits for each of the first 3 battle rounds, the first one being that every single unit can advance and shoot as if stationary, and the second one being that you get a damage buff provided your chosen target is within Mont'ka range. The range starts out at 18 inches but then diminishes on the next couple of turns. First up, that movement and advancing buff means that basically unless your unit wants to charge, you're kind of incentivized just to advance every single unit every turn while you're in Mont'ka. It means that basically every model can be zooming d6 inches more around the board each turn, hopefully getting better lines of sight, getting to objectives, and still keeping up a decent hail of fire. It's pretty handy on basically everything, though maybe particularly useful on anything that's quite slow already. Things like fire warriors or broadsides might well get a bit more advantage out of this than most other things. It does appear though, with this version of the rule written for 9th edition, they have put paid to the fall back and shoot thing. They only list normal move or advances in the things that allow you to shoot as if stationary, and that doesn't include falling back. Next up, that damage buff is an extra pip of AP, and you get to reroll wound rolls of 1. On turn 1 that's within 18 inches, turn 2 that's within 12 inches, and turn 3 it's down to 9 inches. The buff itself is really quite a decent one. Rerolling wound rolls of 1 is pretty much a flat 16% boost to your damage output. For example, if you were expecting to inflict 6 wounds on the enemy before, you'd now expect to inflict 7, and the extra pip of AP I think is actually usually going to be even better than that, particularly if you're firing low AP weapons, things like pulse rifles or burst cannons perhaps. The only time it's going to be less useful is if you're firing things with really high AP or things with really high invul saves. Things like fusion blasters perhaps, they might not care about being AP 5. In particular, it just seems like this is going to be best for anything that's relatively low AP, and also relatively low range, as you'd have to get this close to use the damage anyway. It seems awesome for fire warriors with those pulse rifles, burst cannons, and just anything else opportunistically when the opponent does advance units up to try and take midfield objectives. Overall, Mont'ka just seems really quite powerful, a pretty hefty damage boost up close, and extra movement to help get your Tau there to inflict the damage in the first place. In general, I do think that Mont'ka might well be the one that's taken more out of the two, just purely because of the battle rounds that it takes effect on. I think most people would agree it's far better to get advantages early on in a game of 40k. If you can get some big swings early, you might well have decided the outcome of the game by turn 3, rather than still being waiting for your best benefits to take effect. Both extra mobility and extra damage on an army-wide basis is really hard to pass up. Having said that, I certainly wouldn't say that Kauyon's useless. As said, you do have to wait for Battle Round 3 for it to come into effect, but then you get another couple of big army-wide special rules take effect. Your models can fall back and shoot at -1 to hit, and again they get a damage boost up close, and this one's usually going to be more powerful than the Mont'ka one, exploding 6s to hit, that then become exploding 5s and 4s. First up, for obvious reasons of a Tau, falling back and shooting is very nice indeed. Aside from Mont'ka, there's really not a lot of it about in the current Tau Codex. Some of their units really lost out big time with the changes to the fly rules no longer allowing them to do that. So getting it army-wide just means that your opponent isn't going to be able to silence your guns just by tagging you. I guess having it active from turn 3 onwards isn't really the worst, as your opponent's perhaps more likely to actually have made it to combat by turn 3 and more. The -1 to hit isn't amazing. It can be quite punishing if a lot of the Tau do remain at ballistic skill 4+, but some damage is most certainly better than none. Secondly, that damage buff is seriously nasty. You get it when you're within 12 inches of the enemy and you shoot them, provided the enemy models aren't either in engagement range with you and you haven't fallen back in the same turn. It does basically mean that there's no stacking of the two benefits. Maybe they don't feel like you've ambushed the enemy very well if they've managed to catch you in combat. In any case, on Battle Round 3, all of your units within 12 inches will get exploding 6s to hit, so every hit roll of a 6 will generate 1 additional hit. Then on Battle Round 4, it goes to a seriously powerful exploding 5s to hit, and then on Battle Round 5, it goes to a ludicrous 4+. Don't get me wrong, Battle Round 3 is already pretty great. If you're at ballistic skill 4+, then that's a 33% damage increase. Say if you were expecting 3 wounds on the enemy, you'd now get 4. 5+ is obviously better, and then on a 5, that's usually going to be double the amount of damage on the enemy, which is just kind of insane on an army-wide shooting buff. The only downside to that is that on turn 5 sometimes it might not be quite as important. Some of the time with the way that objectives work, it might not actually matter how much you manage to kill turn 5, just more whether your units can get to objectives and survive on them. If it is super close though, and shooting off one final enemy unit is going to make a difference, then this certainly is going to give you a big buff towards doing that. Overall, in terms of raw benefits, I do think that Kauyon probably is the better out of the two, but at the same time I do think that people will take Mont'ka more, as I think it's usually going to be better to have a very slightly less powerful buff, but on the first few turns. I might be completely wrong on that. Kauyon certainly gives you massive benefits too, but that'll be my guess at the moment. Another thing that remains to be seen is whether or not Shadow Sun or Farsight might provide any sort of buffs to these rules. They certainly do at the moment. If they do have powerful interactions with these, we might see yet more silliness. Anyway, let me know what you think. Personally, I'm pretty impressed by these. Tau is certainly a faction in need of a massive buff, and this does appear to have given them just that. I'll be interested to hear which one you prefer and why down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more like it, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I will certainly keep the regular 40k content coming, with new videos out just about every day. I'll certainly cover any more Tau previews and review the codex in full once we get it. Finally, if you have been enjoying these videos and you'd like to help keep them coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then feel free to check out the link down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.